This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com.
Why does Hellwig ultimately move away from Watt's territory?
He didn't fit. He didn't fit. His heart wasn't in it. And you can tell that real quickly. You know, how much do you learn? The thing about a territory, Conrad, is that it demands that you improve your game because of this reason. You're in the same clubs, the same towns, in other words, the same markets every week. You can't come with the same match. You got to be diversified. You got to add a little. You got to take away a little. You got to change things up because the same paying customer, pardon me, saw you last week. So are you going to do the same routine? And he was a routine guy. He had set moves. That's what he did. And where Sting, on the other hand, was so personable that the guys migrated to Sting, and the veterans would give Sting some help. You know, they would give him advice and feedback and mentoring, but nobody really cared to help Hellwig because he's the kind of guy that you'd talk to and you could see in his face he wasn't listening. He always felt he was smarter than everybody else. I'm only here because of the money. And when he finds somebody that is a bodybuilder and they're so vain and narcissistic, that's all they care about is their look, not their skill set, just their look. How do I look on this 8x10? How's my tan? How's my vascularity? All this other shit that, you know, that was his MO. So a lot of the guys didn't want to give him the time of day. And so that's kind of that deal. So it just didn't work. I'm sure there were some things going forward, you know, maybe he didn't want to do it, put somebody over. Or the you know, the road agents were saying, hey, this guy ain't getting any better. He's got a bad attitude, whatever. So Cowboy quickly saw who the keeper was in that group in his view. So even though that you can contradict that theory by saying, well, but what about WrestleMania 6? You know, you can't live forever on WrestleMania 6.
Right.
And if you go back and watch that match, which a lot of people have, you know, Hogan led the match. Hogan structured it to where they only did things that Warrior could do reasonably well, and that was a short move set. So Cowboy just felt like that he wasn't worth the time or the effort. He didn't have the attitude, very aloof. And Sting, on the other hand, very congenial, very locker room oriented. You know, everybody liked him. He was a very likable guy, just like he is today. So I think that was the deal. Cowboy was big on being loyal to the company and being dedicated. And it didn't seem like the loyalty thing was ever going to come about. And certainly the guy had his own agenda, and it wasn't a team-oriented agenda, even though pro wrestling is probably looked at by a lot of folks as a individual sport, individual entity, if you will. It just was a situation where this guy didn't seem to be all in. He never seemed to be all in our area at that point in time.
You know, I know this sounds silly, but in this era, it's not like Watts exactly has a performance center. There is no power plant like we saw in WCW. How did guys get better in the good old days?
They work every day. That's one of my biggest concerns about our with AEW is the fact that I don't believe that a lot of the talents that we have get to work enough.
Right.
And some of them are making enough money where they don't want to work anymore. They're in the comfort zone, which is a danger area to me. But that was the deal. The territory, like I said earlier, you have to get better to perform in front of the same audience weekly. It wasn't like today's deal where, you know, of course now there's no live events because of the virus. But in those days, you put guys on the road, you booked them every day. So now they're working, you know, 6 or 7 days a week, because in that era you didn't get paid unless you made money, or unless you were booked.
Right.
And that's how you made your money. So if you're sitting home, no payday. It wasn't guaranteed contracts and comfort zones and guys on salary, and they were all incentivized that the better you get and the more over you can become, the more money that we have the chance of drawing. And we'll bake these big old nice pies, and you'll get a slice. The bigger the pie, the bigger your slice. And that was the deal. That's how you got better. I honestly believe, I'm not knocking the Performance Center because I helped create the developmental program there in WWE. I still believe in it, but there's nothing better than working in front of a paying customer with somebody that's better than you and doing it frequently. And that's what the territory system produced. They had their, even though it wasn't officially named like a performance center or training center, whatever, the territories were, in essence, a training center because you worked all the time. You're expected to get better. And if you didn't get better, somebody's going to take your spot and they'll be given a chance to contribute. So that was kind of the thing there with the territory thing. He should have gotten better. I can't remember who all we booked him with, he and Sting, but it was always guys that were better than them, veterans who could teach them things if you were willing to listen. More often than not, Warrior was not willing to listen.
Let's talk a little bit about the independent dates that he does. I mean, he's still, even though he's not actively a part of big time wrestling, whether it's WWF or WCW at the time, he makes an occasional and very sporadic independent shot in like 93, 94, 96. And he even starts a Warrior University, which is a wrestling school. Listen, I'm not trying to, as you would say off the air, gut and quarter the guy, but an Ultimate Warrior wrestling school, that feels a bit like an oxymoron, right?
Yeah, kinda.
I mean, like Lance Storm. Okay. I'm with it. Like that guy, fundamentally sound. Don't remember seeing a bad Lance Storm match. Ultimate Warrior wrestling school. I mean, maybe he could teach on look and charisma and diet and exercise and all that stuff, but I don't know how much he could teach you about the mechanics of putting together a match, right?
Of course not. It was strictly financially driven. Using his name and his reputation, his tenure in WWE is enough to entice a lot of naive young talents that want to have similar success going to the Warrior Wrestling School. And that was, to me, that was the entire calling card. He couldn't, he couldn't teach anybody the fundamentals of wrestling. He didn't know the fundamentals of wrestling. He couldn't teach somebody crowd psychology because he didn't have crowd psychology. He had a name that he could market and entice, better said, these young cats to pay a tuition and come to his school. I don't even know how many guys went to a Warrior School. I've never talked to anybody that went to it. And I don't know how long it lasted. It didn't last long because until we brought it up here today, I'd forgotten all about that. So, yeah, it was an interesting time. I noticed in the very beginning, Hellwig was I don't know if introverted is the way to say it, if that's the quite the right term. I'm not sure. It is for now, but he didn't factor in to the rest of the roster. He meaning Warrior, always seemed to be out of place, Conrad, a little bit in that locker room. He wasn't from a team sport in reality. He never played sports. He was not a locker room savvy guy. How you conduct yourself in a locker room with other talents. So that hurt him a little bit. And I think sometimes it just seemed to me like this was the plan B or plan C for him. Something not that he set out to be, but but the route took him there because that was his best alternative at that point in time. The guy, he got his degree in chiropractor, whatever the word would be. He became a chiropractor. That wasn't satisfying enough. And of course, I don't know how the money is there, but he couldn't, he needed spotlight. He needed a spotlight on him. And so it was an interesting thing. He didn't last long in Mid-South, UWF area. He didn't go far. He traveled to Dallas and got hooked up with Gary Hart, and they called him the Dingo Warrior, but he never seemed to me that he was happy. I never saw him on a genuinely happy day. I just don't think he was built for the locker room, even though people say, well, wait a minute, JR, he headlined WrestleMania 6 with Hogan. He sure did. But that don't mean he was a perfect fit. He was never a perfect fit in pro wrestling. So we'll talk about his personality as we go through, and it's very consistent. He didn't change a lot. I always thought he was a downer. I didn't think he was a team player. It was all about him, and he was very outspoken about political issues that he had no business of bringing into the locker room. People knew that he was a little strange. So, but he went to Dallas and got reinvented, I guess, as a single, which is what he wanted to be all along, under the guidance of Gary Hart. And then, of course, WWE sees him and says, "Oh, look at that jacked up guy, and we got to have him."
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at savewithconrad.com.